I never expected moving in with Adrian would change the course of my life. At first, he was just a convenient roommate, someone who answered my ad when I needed help with rent. He carried himself with an effortless confidence that was disarming: dark hair, always slightly tousled, an easy smile, and a charm that made people gravitate toward him. I told myself he was simply outgoing, the type who could strike up conversation with anyone. Still, there was something in the way his eyes lingered on me during those first days that unsettled me, though I quickly brushed it off as imagination. Our apartment wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a shared living space, a kitchen that barely fit us both, but it became a little world of our own. We settled into routines almost naturally. Sunday mornings belonged to coffee and silence, with sunlight pouring through the blinds while we sat across from each other, scrolling through our phones. Weeknights often ended with us collapsing on the couch, watching whatever show was trending, sometimes falling asleep before the credits rolled. Adrian would tease me about my terrible taste in movies, and I'd laugh at his dramatic reenactments of entire scenes. It was ordinary. It was safe. And yet, beneath the ordinary, something flickered. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way Adrian would stand too close while cooking, his shoulder brushing mine as he reached for the salt. The warmth of his laughter when I said something unintentionally funny, his hand resting briefly on my knee before he pulled it back, as though he'd realized the touch had lingered too long. Even in casual conversation, there was a charge I couldn't quite name. At the time, I had a boyfriend. His name was Daniel, and he lived 2 cities away, finishing his graduate program. We were making long-distance work, though the distance often felt heavier than I admitted. Adrian knew about him, of course. He'd ask about Daniel from time to time, always in that casual, roommate sort of way. Still, there was an undercurrent in his tone, a curiosity that seemed sharper than simple politeness. One night stands out clearly in my memory. Adrian stumbled in close to midnight, the smell of whiskey clinging to him. He dropped onto the couch beside me, his grin wide, his eyes glassy. He said, his voice low, "You're the only person I actually like coming home to." It was meant as a compliment, I suppose, but something about the way he said it, too sincere, too exposed, made my chest tighten. I laughed it off, replying lightly, but the words clung to me long after he went to bed. The truth was, I sometimes felt closer to Adrian than I did to Daniel. That realization unsettled me. Daniel and I had history, plans, promises exchanged in whispers during late-night calls. Yet with Adrian there was an ease, an intimacy that grew silently, feeding on the small spaces of our shared life. I began catching myself in moments I didn't want to admit, watching the way Adrian's shirt clung to his shoulders after a workout, listening too intently when he talked about his childhood, memorizing the cadence of his voice, wondering what it would feel like if one of those accidental touches lasted just a little longer. But I told myself it was nothing. Curiosity, maybe, the simple closeness of 2 people sharing a roof. I tried to bury the thought, to dismiss the restless energy that rose whenever Adrian entered the room. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was late, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I was heading to my room, and Adrian emerged from his half-asleep, shirtless, his hair messy from bed. We passed each other in the narrow hallway. For a second, the space seemed impossibly small, our shoulders brushing, our hands grazing in the dark. It was nothing more than a touch, a fraction of a second, but the electricity of it pulsed through me like a spark, startling and undeniable. I froze, and so did he. Our eyes met briefly in the shadows, and something unspoken lingered between us, something that had been waiting, quietly, all along. Adrian smiled faintly, almost as though he knew. Then he stepped aside, mumbling a soft goodnight, and disappeared back into his room. I stood there, my hand still tingling from that brief contact, my heart hammering. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder, was it really just my imagination? Or was Adrian hiding something far deeper than I had dared to believe? After that night in the hallway, nothing felt the same. A touch that should have been forgettable had lodged itself in my memory, replaying in quiet moments, intruding when I least expected. I told myself it was nothing, yet every time Adrian walked past me, I remembered the brush of his skin, the faint smile that lingered in the dark. The days that followed grew heavy with a tension I couldn't name aloud. Conversations between us carried an undertone, as though we were both circling something neither dared to speak. I found myself hyper-aware of him, his voice, the way he leaned against the kitchen counter, the soft rhythm of his laugh. When he asked about Daniel, I answered carefully, though even I could hear the hollowness in my words. Adrian seemed different too. He hovered closer, asked questions he had never asked before. "Are you happy with him?" He once said casually, though his eyes stayed fixed on mine as if the answer mattered far too much. I gave him a quick nod, but the question burrowed deep, making me doubt truths I thought were solid. One evening, a storm swept through the city, the power cutting out without warning. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the walls, and we sat together in the living room, the glow of a single candle casting shadows across Adrian's face. He poured wine into 2 glasses, his hand steady despite the flicker of candlelight. We talked for hours about families, regrets, dreams we hadn't voiced before. There was a rawness in Adrian I hadn't seen, a quiet vulnerability hidden beneath his usual bravado. Sometimes, he said softly, staring into his glass, "I think I've been living half my life in silence, wanting things I couldn't admit." His words hung between us like a confession, though he never said my name. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the weight of the moment pressed me still. Then he looked at me, steady searching, and whispered, "You know what I mean, don't you?" I did, and yet I said nothing. The silence stretched until it broke in a way I hadn't expected. He leaned forward, slow, deliberate, and before I could think, his lips brushed mine. It was a fleeting kiss, almost hesitant, but it set every nerve in my body alight. I pulled back instinctively, breath caught, guilt already flooding me. "Adrian," I began, but he shook his head, eyes sharp with fear and hope tangled together. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though his voice trembled with something more. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I should have walked away. I should have reminded him and myself that I was not free. Instead, I stayed frozen, torn between the weight of loyalty and the pull of something I had secretly longed for. When he reached out, fingers brushing my wrist, I didn't move. The next moment blurred into inevitability. Another kiss, deeper, desperate, a release of all the words we hadn't spoken. I felt myself unraveling, surrendering to the desire that had been building in silence. For a heartbeat, there was no Daniel, no promises, only the intensity of Adrian's closeness, the warmth of his breath against my skin. When it ended, I pushed away, chest heaving. This can't happen," I said, though even as I spoke, I knew the conviction was brittle. Adrian's expression faltered, pain flashing in his eyes. "I know," he whispered, and yet his hand lingered near mine, as if neither of us truly believed the words. The days after that kiss were unbearable. We pretended nothing had changed, but every look carried weight, every accidental touch felt deliberate. The tension only thickened until, one night, the pretense shattered again. It wasn't sudden this time. It was quiet, deliberate, the kind of choice that comes when resistance finally gives way. In the dark of my room, with the city silent outside, Adrian and I crossed a line we could never uncross. It was urgent and clumsy, filled with guilt and want in equal measure. When it was over, I lay in the silence, staring at the ceiling, Daniel's name burning in my mind. I told myself it was just once, a mistake fueled by circumstance. But deep down, I already knew the truth. One moment would never be enough. That night marked the beginning of something dangerous, something I could neither deny nor fully accept. And as I lay awake beside Adrian, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I realized with a hollow certainty, this was never supposed to happen. But I didn't want it to stop. The secret between Adrian and me quickly became a shadow that followed us everywhere. At first, I convinced myself it was manageable. What happened in the quiet of our apartment would stay there, hidden in the dark. But secrets have a way of seeping into the light, and every day I carried the weight of what we had done like a stone lodged in my chest. Daniel visited one weekend. I should have been relieved to see him, yet from the moment he stepped through the door, I felt only dread. Adrian greeted him with politeness, but his eyes betrayed him. The sharpness in his gaze, the way his jaw tightened when Daniel casually rested a hand on my shoulder, made it impossible to ignore the undercurrent. Adrian barely stayed in the room, retreating to his bedroom or vanishing on long walks. Daniel noticed. "Is everything okay with him?" Daniel asked one night as we sat together on the couch. I forced a laugh, brushing it off as Adrian just being moody, but the lie tasted bitter. Every second Daniel held my hand, every smile he gave me, only deepened my guilt. I couldn't look at him without remembering Adrian's touch, Adrian's kiss, Adrian's voice whispering my name in the dark. When Daniel left, the apartment was thick with unspoken tension. Adrian confronted me almost immediately, his words sharp, his voice low. "Do you love him?" he asked, and though the question was simple, it felt like a blade pressed to my skin. "Yes," I said, but the word trembled on my tongue. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "And what about me?" I had no answer. For the first time since we had crossed that line, Adrian's confidence cracked. He admitted what I had sensed all along, that he had spent years hiding parts of himself, burying desire beneath layers of humor and bravado. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he confessed, his voice raw. "But I can't pretend anymore. I wanted you. I still do." Hearing him lay it bare was both terrifying and intoxicating. His desire had been hidden for so long, a secret even from himself. And now it was directed wholly at me. I wanted to believe I could untangle myself, step back into the safety of loyalty and simplicity. But the truth was undeniable. I wanted him too, and that one had already consumed me. The following weeks were a blur of passion and guilt. We stole moments together, careful yet reckless, unable to resist the pull. I told myself lies to soften the truth, that Daniel would never know, that what Adrian and I shared was temporary, that I could still hold both worlds together. But each day, the lies grew heavier, and I began to suffocate beneath them. It ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with quiet inevitability. Daniel called one night, his voice tired, distant. He said he felt something slipping between us, that my words no longer carried warmth. I wanted to deny it, to fight for what we once had, but as I listened, I realized he was right. I had already left him, even if I hadn't spoken it aloud. We ended things that night, the conversation brief, the silence afterward deafening. I sat in the dark, phone still in my hand, my heart aching with the sharpness of loss. Adrian found me there, and without a word, he pulled me into his arms. For the first time, I didn't resist. He whispered into my hair, his voice steady, "You don't have to hide anymore." His words should have been a comfort, yet they carried their own weight, because even though Daniel was gone, the truth remained. What Adrian and I had built began in betrayal, born from secrecy and desire that crossed boundaries never meant to be crossed. In the quiet that followed, I wondered if love could grow from such fragile ground, or if it would always be haunted by the way it began. Some nights, I still replay Adrian's first confession, the storm, the candlelight, the trembling words. "I've wanted you for a long time." I don't know if it was love or lust dressed in love's clothing, but I know it changed me. Desire revealed can never be buried again. And though I carry the scars of what we did, I also carry the memory of Adrian's smile in the shadows, a smile that told me, without words, that I was the secret he had kept hidden all along. Life after Daniel's departure was quieter, but not simpler. The apartment that once felt warm and familiar now carried a strange heaviness, as though the walls themselves remembered what had unfolded within them. Adrian moved through the rooms with a gentleness I hadn't seen before, careful with his words, his touch, his presence. He seemed to know I was fragile, caught between loss and longing, and he gave me space, though the space itself was filled with him. At first, I believed things would settle. Without the weight of secrecy, perhaps Adrian and I could exist openly unburdened. Yet freedom has its own costs, and I quickly discovered that honesty did not erase the past. We spent more time together than ever, cooking, laughing, even daring to plan small trips beyond the city. On the surface, we looked like two friends growing closer, but beneath it, we both knew the truth. Our bond had been forged in betrayal, and no matter how tender Adrian was, I couldn't forget the fracture that lay beneath it. One night, as we sat on the balcony with the city lights spread before us, Adrian reached for my hand. His thumb traced absent circles against my skin, and for a moment it felt natural, even right. Then he said softly, "You don't regret choosing me, do you?" The question struck me harder than I expected. I searched his face, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the hope trembling in his voice. "I don't know," I admitted, and the honesty stung both of us. Adrian withdrew slightly, his hand slipping from mine. I don't want to be the reason you hate yourself," he murmured. His words haunted me, because in quiet moments when the apartment was silent and I was left with only my thoughts, I did wonder if I had betrayed not only Daniel but also some part of myself. The person I had always believed I was loyal, grounded, certain, had unraveled in Adrian's presence. What did that say about me? Yet, despite the doubts, I couldn't let him go. There was a magnetism to Adrian that pulled me back every time. His laughter, his warmth, the way he looked at me like I was more than I had ever dared to believe, all of it tethered me to him. Still, cracks began to show. I caught myself comparing Adrian to Daniel, replaying conversations, wondering if I had chosen passion over stability. Adrian noticed my distance, even when I said nothing. One evening, frustration finally broke through his restraint. "You still think about him," he said flatly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes." He clenched his jaw, then looked away, hurt clouding his expression. Then maybe I was a mistake. The words cut deep. I wanted to protest, to tell him he wasn't, but I couldn't form the conviction. Instead, I reached for him, desperate to bridge the gap. "You weren't a mistake," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "But I don't know who I am in all of this anymore." Adrian's eyes softened, though pain lingered there. He pulled me into his arms, his voice low against my ear. "Then let's figure it out together." The promise was simple, almost fragile, but it carried a weight that grounded me. For the first time, I realized Adrian wasn't just the cause of my confusion, he was caught in it too, navigating feelings he had buried for years. We sat like that for a long time, the night wrapping around us, the city's hum distant. I didn't have answers, and neither did he. All we had was the certainty of each other's presence and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. As I closed my eyes, I understood that hidden desires don't disappear once spoken. They evolve, reshaping lives in ways both beautiful and devastating. Adrian and I had stepped into uncharted territory, and the path ahead was anything but clear. Yet for the first time, I wasn't afraid of not knowing.